Good morning, everyone. And I think this is a more than heartfelt thanks for you coming here this morning, Monday morning at this time. It's a big ask, but we really appreciate your attendance, and I'm deeply grateful to those who have agreed to sit on the panels this morning. You know, I think it would be a truism to say that for something like 40 years, marketing has been one of the engines of globalization. And during that process, academic globalists have always wanted to do one thing, which is to maximize the homogeneity of the so-called global village while minimizing its diversity. And, you know, Tom Friedman was the epitome of that school of thought, and it was crystallized in his famous phrase, a flat world. And that was a brilliantly promoted phrase to such a degree that, you know, at one time, any denial of flatness in the world suggested that you were some kind of heretic, that you just didn't get it. Now, there are many convincing critiques of Friedman which demonstrate that he places too much reliance on supply chains as global integrators which dissolve differences, or even, in his view, sometimes, you know, historic enmities. But we represent the demand side. And from the demand side, from the point of view of the consumers we seek to engage, I have always felt that the concept of a flat world is exaggerated, and that the world may have become both smaller and flatter, but it absolutely has not become homogeneous. The world's not plain vanilla. No, it's tutti frutti. So, before I moved to New York, I worked for 15 years in Asia. And it didn't take me long to realize that the cultural diversity in that region was its dominant characteristic. That countries like India, China, Malaysia, Indonesia were all diverse coalitions of culture, on top of which lingua franca, whether it be Bahasa, Putonghua, English, was superimposed, and some common icons also. But it was also clear that as those countries developed their economic power, so globalization would become much more complex. And, you know, in the past, globalization was conceived of as being developed here in New York or in London, and then at best imposed, or at worst just sort of glided out to the rest of the world. But, you know, globalization can't remain a one-way street. Ideas and brands will develop in the new world as well. It will be a two-way street. And we've tried to recognize that in a very tangible way this year by establishing the first US-based China practice, which seeks to assist Chinese businesses who want to enter the US but find their entry challenging, and who are beset by challenges which are really essentially at root cultural and not fundamentally economic or business related. So all this demands something which I like to call CQ, cultural intelligence, because it adds something which the IQ of economists cannot add to the party. One legitimate anxiety in this sort of world is, does a focus on diversity undermine our ability to scale? And scale lies at the heart of all cost-effective marketing programs. But all our experience suggests that it need not. And in fact, it's the digital revolution of the last decade which has guaranteed our ability to celebrate diversity while aggregating scale. So far from being the great leveler, actually, in my view, the internet has been the great differentiator. But that brings a tendency actually to fragment, and it requires that we then organize the content and find big ideas, brand ideas, which actually allow us to do that. And in fact, we would go further to argue that big ideals, not just big ideas, points of view which brands hold, enable us to build content ecosystems in the internet which are flexible in their very nature, and then which can acknowledge and reflect cultural diversity. And that's exactly what big ideals like A Smarter Planet on IBM or Real Women on Dove actually do. So the role of the big ideal is to set the agenda, define the core content, then all around the world the task is to extend those assets into multiple dialogues to create real engagement. So in the digital era, inclusion can be the contributor to and not the underminer of scale. So CQ is in our DNA. In Australia, as an agency, we have helped pioneer multicultural communication in one of the countries which has taken it at a governmental level most seriously. Globally, we set up last year Ogilvy Noor, the world's first bespoke Islamic marketing practice to represent the consumer voice of the world's 1.8 billion Muslims, a 2.1 trillion market in dollars, founded on cultural principles such as halal and haram. And those Muslims, of whom half are under 25 years old, come from a myriad of different traditions, cultures, and ethnicities. In India, our practice Ogilvy Dakshin helps clients connect with the distinct ethnicities and cultures of southern India, for whom Hindi is a foreign language, and the worlds of Bombay and Delhi as foreign as New York or Philadelphia. We have learnt to communicate with the non-Han ethnic minorities in China and the French of Quebec, who are not just a linguistic minority, but a cultural minority, or majority, I should say, within Quebec. We have directed ourselves to understanding the new migrant communities of Europe. 1/3 of the world's migrants sit there, who would constitute the world's 5th most populous country, if they were a country. We understand that there are at least 4 Mexicos and a much larger number of Brazils. And here in the States, Ogilvy Rojo speaks to the Hispanic markets, not with the sense that they are a linguistic segment, but recognizing that in itself, those groups represent rich cultural diversity and draw from many countries and many strands of Hispanicism, and indeed, pre-Hispanicism. So that's why I'm so excited by the prospects of the new general market and the discussions which will take place here today. They are premised on the belief that here in the United States, there has been some kind of damaging fragmentation between the concepts of traditional general market on the one hand and multiculturalism on the other. And that has been institutionalized by the agencies who serve those different interests. As a result, it's easy for brands to become fragmented. What's lacking is the luxury of an integrated effort focused on a business problem. Culture is not often embedded in the thinking up front in the ways which our experience suggests it could be and should be in different parts of the world. Rather, it becomes relegated to the role of a handoff. It's the end of the line, and sometimes it's really not clear that it's the right line at all. So it no longer makes sense for that to be the only choice. Wise brand stewardship, combined with the growth in the size and spending power of what were once minority communities, argues for a more coordinated approach, jettisoning that artificial divide between general market and multicultural agency. Instead, we hope that there is an opportunity in this country for much more of a cross-cultural approach, which we are here calling the new general market, and that's the idea of Ogilvy Culture. To tell you more about how we envisage working with Ogilvy Culture in the States, I'd now like to introduce and hand over to my colleague John Seifert, who is the president of Ogilvy Mather North America. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Miles. Let me just extend Miles' deep thanks for having you all here today. This is an amazing turnout. But I said to my team who was putting this together, nearly 100 people have contributed to getting us here today. And while the room may look quite slick, let me promise you that everything that is going on behind the scenes is anything but. It is a messy process. There's a lot of angst going on every day pulling this all together. But I could not be prouder of the team behind both the content and the orchestration of the conversation that we're going to have today. I've been doing this job leading Ogilvy North America now for nearly 2.5 years. This has to be the proudest thing I stand up here and represent, because I think it is just so, fundamentally important to our future. Both Miles and I have had the honor and privilege of working for Ogilvy around the world. And our whole career has been in a kind of multicultural context. And yet, here in the United States, you would think that this is somehow, a completely new event, which, as you all know very well, it isn't. Now, the other thing is I want to introduce my partner, Donna Pedro. None of this would have been possible without Donna. One of the things that Donna did when I first took over is she sat me down and she said, before you have one full day, let me give you my perspective of Ogilvy, my perspective of Ogilvy people, our progress or the lack of it in the areas of diversity and inclusion. But even more importantly, something that she said to me which sort of galvanized my whole outlook on this subject was the point that said nothing good, no change is fundamentally going to happen and sustain itself if we don't connect this all to a larger point of view of our business. If it isn't clear to every single employee, we're not doing this because we want to be the UN. We want to do this because we believe that the most diverse and inclusive workforce in the entire industry is central to being a great company, a great agency. And for us to succeed, we had to make it real in terms of the business. And so every day, Donna and I meet every week and often several times a day. We've been trying to be focused and committed to that very purpose. And I hope that a lot of what you're going to hear and see today is a real reflection of that. Now, the other thing we do, there was a piece today in the New York Times. No conference is ever a successful conference unless you have some press around it. Stuart Elliott, who is a very thoughtful and I would say somewhat skeptical at times writer on behalf of our industry, I think called out with great clarity our mission here in the paper today. But I also just wanted to tell you that in talking to Stuart about all this, we could not be more humble. I can't promise perfection in all the documentation and everything you're going to see today, but one thing I want you to know from the bottom of my heart, this is not about us being a leader. This is not about us inventing something new to make more money. This is about the future of this company and the future of our people in it. Because if we don't get this right over time, with your help, with the collective help of our clients, who frankly are the greatest source of pressure for change that we have, because they are ahead of us and have been for a long time in the thinking about the cross-cultural imperative, our partners, who too often we don't reach out enough to and ask for their help and their insights and their guidance. The wealth of knowledge and insight in so many of our partners is there to be served with our clients if we just get it out and draw on it appropriately. So to have you all come together today as a combination of clients, business partners, the employees of this company, some of the most senior people in this company, is really something that I'm incredibly grateful for and proud of. Now, before Donna sort of takes you through a little bit about the inside of the messiness, because I've asked her to sort of just be very candid and clear with you of where this all comes from. First of all, David would have been 100 years old a couple of weeks ago if he was still here with us. He is with us in spirit. This is the kind of thing David would have insisted on. David had a point of view about how the world was changing. He had a deep respect for consumers and the insights that go with consumer marketing. And so we think this is something that's very consistent with everything David would have believed in. And really for us, it's built on three fundamental pillars. Our people. We have to have the talent in this company to represent the cross-cultural reality and opportunity for our clients, both in terms of business and marketing and effective communications. You're going to hear a lot about this thing called the cross-cultural model. There's a lot of language in this subject to unpack. Multiculturalism, the diversity and inclusion agenda. There's a lot of conceptual ideas that have been with us for a long time, and we're hoping to put some of that into perspective. And thirdly, we cannot do this alone. This is something that we do in partnership with all of you. So let me turn it over to Donna and just give you a little bit of perspective of what's behind the scenes here.
Thank you, John. And good morning, everyone. It's always good to look out on a Monday morning and see a full room. This is wonderful. As John said, we sat down, it's almost 3 years. It'll be 3 years the beginning of next year. And I'm a very candid person, so for those of you who know me, I'm a very straight shooter. And I said, you know what? It is about the people. When I first came to Ogilvy, everyone talked about the client, the client, the client. And I was like, well, what about the people? What about the people? So we've made this shift to the people. And that's the first pillar. We have to have the best and the brightest to keep our clients happy, right? So that's the equation. It's our talent. Oh, keep clicking. Love technology. Okay, where are my slides? I can do this without slides too. So anyway, there you go. Go back, that one. As John stated, you know, our founder, David Ogilvy, was such a visionary. So when I came in, I'd go through all the readings and I'd be like, wow, he was ahead of his time, ahead of his time. This is actually one of our recruitment ads that we started using 4 years ago. And to me, it spoke to that David knew in order to get the best, you had to have diversity of perspective, diversity of thought. And that comes from all of our backgrounds. So it really starts with who is David Ogilvy. And truthfully, happy birthday to David that we now have Ogilvy culture. So our inside-out approach, we had to look at ourselves. Who are we? What do we believe in? What do we stand for? So we developed a diversity and inclusion strategy that was aligned with the business. And what John said, that is so important to me. This is not a check-off-the-box exercise. I do not sing Kumbaya. This is about the business. What's happening in our world so that we, again, can come up with the best solutions for our clients. Recruitment. I looked around and I said, our numbers are terrible. At that time in 2007, the advertising industry as a whole was under tremendous scrutiny, saying, you guys aren't really good at diversity and inclusion. So I said, let's take the best practices of our clients, some of my former clients when I was a consultant, and apply them here. And let's be the best in our little world. And so we enhanced our pipeline recruiting of our associates. Our associates are recent college grads. They come in, do 1 year of a rotational program, and then are placed in key functions. You might say, well, that's just a start. But we're now into the 5th year. And each year, we look at those as our young talent or as our future leaders. And we launched professional networks. A lot of organizations call them employee resource groups, employee networks. We called them professional networks. God bless you. And those professional networks all have a charter and a pillar. One key one is recruitment. So today we actually have 9 professional networks. And this was the start, really, of Ogilvy culture. John and I sat and met with all of the network leads. And if you know some of the best practices, right? We all know that from Frito-Lay, their Hispanic network came up with the guacamole flavored chip, right? But I know when I was doing work at J&J, their Hispanic network came up with a children's Tylenol that was tropical flavored. However, guess what? It also crossed over to the Afro-Caribbean community. So out of one network came a new product that was right there 4 or 5 years ago, cross-cultural. I said these networks have to help us recruit. They have to be out there on campus. They have to help us with mid-level talent. But most important, they have to support the enterprise. So as you can see, the Women's Leadership Network, Black Diaspora, Red Lotus, I always count on my fingers, the Young Professional Network, Ogilvy Pride, our Administrative Professional Network, Latin Red, Working Parents Network, and recently launched Dunya, our Muslim Professional Network, are the driving forces behind our employee engagement, our talent, retention and recruitment, and also Ogilvy culture. So we began on the inside, and now we're ready to come to the outside world and say, we've got the talent, we have the insights, and as John said, we are humble, but we think we're on to something. And working with the associates, I will tell you that one out of 3 of Generation Y is a person of color. Cross-cultural and diversity for this new talent pool, no-brainer for them. It's who they are. It's what they live. They live already in a very different world than I lived in, because mine was very siloed growing up, right? Their world is cross-cultural. So I believe that they are the new market, and we'll see more and more of it. So today, I think you're going to hear a lot from amazing panelists. I think you're going to feel the passion of the Ogilvy Culture Group. I hope for clients here that you can see that our insights can help you with the new general market. And I just hope that everyone has a great morning here at Ogilvy, and full day, actually. And let's hope it doesn't rain tonight so we can have cocktails on the roof.
Exactly. Donna, thank you very much.
Thank you, John.